Welcome to the Limitless Leaders podcast series brought to you by ASPS, the Aesthetic Society, and the American Hernia Society with the generous support of Allergan Aesthetics. My name is Dr. Ashley Amalfi, and I'm a board-certified plastic surgeon at the Quatella Center for Plastic Surgery in Rochester, New York, and I'm the chair of the ASPS Women Plastic Surgeons Forum and the Limitless Leaders Steering Committee member. Please join us for Season 2 of the Limitless Leaders podcast, where we dive into the stories of extraordinary women making a significant impact in our field, as well as the men who are supporting them to get there. We are breaking gender barriers and inspiring the next generation of leaders.
Good afternoon. You're listening to the Limitless Leaders podcast series, brought to you by ASPS, the Aesthetic Society, and the American Hernia Society, with the generous support of Allergan Aesthetics. I'm Dr. Camille Cash. I'm a board-certified plastic surgeon with over 20 years' experience in Houston, Texas, and I'm today's special guest host of Limitless Leaders. Today we have a very important topic to discuss. It's something that is a little sensitive, I'll say, and I have two exciting guests that are joining me. I have Dr. Wilmina Lanford and Dr. Erica Sears. Welcome, ladies. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hi, everyone. I'm Wilmina Lanford, and I'm currently a chief resident completing an integrated plastic surgery residency at Johns Hopkins this month. I'm very excited to be embarking on the next phase of my career in private practice here in Maryland. I identify as West African and Caribbean. And inspired by my experience as a Liberian Puerto Rican, I'm also proud to mention that I founded an organization called Women of Color in Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery. It's an organization that aims to empower and support women from diverse backgrounds with networking, mentorship, and advocacy.
Thank you, Dr. Lanford. Dr. Sears?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to be here and be a part of this discussion. As you said, my name is Erica Sears. I am an associate professor at the University of Michigan, where I practice plastic surgery and hand surgery. I did all my training at the University of Michigan since medical school, integrated plastic surgery residency, health services research fellowship, and then a hand fellowship, where then I joined the faculty there in 2015. And I also have the privilege of practicing clinically at the Ann Arbor VA. I identify as a Black woman. I was born and raised in Marion, Indiana. I'm a mother of two boys, and I had the privilege of being the first Black woman to graduate from my residency program.
Ooh, that's awesome.
Well, that's great. Well, as I said, my name is Dr. Camille Cash. I've been in private practice, kind of the old head of the group for 20 years. So I was also the first and only African-American to graduate from my program. I was the first African-American female plastic surgeon in the state of Texas. And it's been a very, exciting but challenging journey. And so today we're going to speak about racism. And this is a polarizing subject. It can be controversial. Sometimes people don't want to talk about it. They tend to find that it's just either uncomfortable, or for some folks, they feel like it's unnecessary. So why, Dr. Sears, why discuss racism? Why are we putting ourselves in such a visible and vulnerable position to speak on such a polarizing subject?
That's a good question. Starting with the why, I have a vested interest, obviously, as it affects me personally, affects my community, but I think really addressing racism and bias and having empathy to understand experiences that are different from our own is really critical for us to be able to take better care of patients who might be experiencing things that we don't understand or don't have a perspective of, better care of our colleagues, our learners, our children, ourselves. And so, racism and bias really impacts everyone, but it's really critical to develop a skill of empathy toward perspectives that are different than we personally experience and understand. So, for me, that's why this topic is important.
And Dr. Lanford, tell us, why do you feel it's important to discuss racism, microaggressions, etc.?
Yeah, I think that we take on the task because we've basically gone through certain experiences that allow us to be at the forefront of this conversation. And so, our experiences have allowed us to raise awareness and provide some input on systemic issues. I think that it's an important topic for everyone. So everyone from all backgrounds should be actively engaging in this discussion on racism. And that's how we're really going to move and push things forward.
I'd like to ask Dr. Sears, could you share your experience with an example of implicit biases or microaggression that you've had to endure throughout your training or even your career?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think there's a lot of situations that come to mind that feel really uncomfortable, so to speak, and they may or may not. I don't think that they necessarily fit in many times in the category of overt racism, but perhaps a bit more than implicit biases, which people have unconscious associations that they may just not be aware of, right? That make people feel either that they don't belong or that they're less than. But so a couple of examples that I can think of that fit this category of very uncomfortable situations and where you're like, should I share this perspective and educate them or not? So we obviously know that a lot of things changed after George Floyd was murdered. And many people came to me, my colleagues, like, are you okay? So sorry this happened, and asking me, how I feel about it. And so in that situation, people of color know that this has been going on for a long time, right? But usually it's taken cell phone videos to get mainstream to realize that this is a systemic problem when you can see it. So, and I'm just thinking about how do I respond to colleagues, more senior people who are asking me if I'm okay to educate them that, hey, this has actually been going on for a long time. So I'm actually okay because I don't want to say I'm like numb to it a little, but you've come to expect that this is nothing new to me, but they're expecting that this is due to you. So these are the situations where I'm thinking, like, how do I educate people about a different perspective when they're having these conversations? I've had people talk about reverse racism, like non-people of color being discriminated against in school and how up in arms there about that, or the whole flag kneeling debate when these things have come up, like in the operating room in discussion, or a patient asking me about my thoughts about critical race theory, right? Where you're in a patient interaction is not appropriate conversation to be having, but you have to use your emotional energy to think, is it appropriate right now for me to either educate perhaps your boss, your patient, your peer, or even a resident when they have a perspective that clearly they don't understand, right? And is it up to me to educate them right now to potentially make them uncomfortable, not knowing what kind of response I'm going to get? So those are most of the time the situations that come to mind that are fairly uncomfortable in a professional atmosphere and at work. And of course, there are lots of implicit bias situations where patient asks, are you my doctor? Or when am I going to see the doctor after you've had a long conversation with them, and things like that. So that's been my experience.
How do you respond when a patient says, "Are you my doctor?" after you've just explained a complex hand repair for them?
I just reinforce and say, yes, I'm your surgeon. I'm the boss. I'm the one that will be operating on you. Just know you can't express that frustration. It's just not appropriate. And so I personally just reinforce, like, yes, I'm the person that's the surgeon and I will be taking care of you. And I purposely, introduce myself as Dr. Sears at the beginning of the conversation. And even when I was a resident, right, I always have my white coat on. because I will likely be mistaken for not the doctor as a resident. So I do that less now because usually most patients know that they're coming to see me and my name. And so I make sure to tell them I'm Dr. Sears, if I've never met them in person before. So um,
It's so interesting you mentioned the white coat, because at the hospital they've made it a point that all of the female residents wear a badge that say surgeon, because we get labeled as something else. And I can also relate to um, just being in a room where I'm the senior resident and my intern who just started 2 weeks, prior, is, the one that the patient speaks to and asks all of the difficult questions to. And he ends up looking at me and the patient
I've,
confused, because now they're like,
yeah,
"Wait, hold on, who's the boss?" And I'm like, "Yeah,
I've
I'm actually
definitely
the
had
boss
that
in this
happen
room now."
with
And it's
like
very
male
funny.
residents for sure.
That's great. I remember when I was in medical school and I was on one of my first rotations, and I'm excited. I've got my little short white coat, and I happened to be on rheumatology with an all female team. So I'm the second year medical student, female. Third year medical student doing an elective, female. You've got the internal medicine resident, female. You have the rheumatology fellow, female, and you have the attending, female. And we're walking, through the Texas Medical Center to Methodist, and we get on the elevator. And this older gentleman said, "Oh my goodness, I feel so safe with all these nurses on this elevator." And my attending looked at him, and she said, "Well, you'll feel even better because we're all doctors."
Yeah.
And that just kind of tickled me, because she was ready for him, and she probably had heard that a time or two
That was
herself.
a nice response.
No, very nice, very nice. I'll tell you about an experience that I had, and not that long ago. It was in 2018, and I was invited to a very small meeting, an executive retreat with a group of plastic surgeons that are in leadership for one of our organizations. And I was an invited guest. Everybody else had been there multiple years, were very active in the society. And I introduced myself every morning. I got up at the front of the stage and did a presentation, and had dinner and went to happy hour, etc. Brainstormed with my colleagues. And at the end of the meeting, the first day was all plastic surgeons. Second day is plastic surgeons in industry. And then as we're leaving, flying home, one of my colleagues asked me some questions, and I didn't. I couldn't follow his train of thought. He was asking me, "Oh, he said something about, oh, your boss is really great. She said, da, da." And he asked me, where do you work again? Who do you work for? And I'm so confused and thrown off. And I realized at the same exact moment that his I figured out his wife kicked him underneath the table. And I said, "Oh, okay, I get this. He thinks I'm one of the industry reps.
Mm.
He doesn't realize I'm a plastic surgeon." And I just was I kind of chuckled, because I think his wife hit him pretty hard, and he got the memo. But it is amazing that you can be almost 18 years in practice, think that you've done something. You go to a room with your colleagues where you're an invited guest, a very intimate setting, and then at the end of the weekend, you're still not recognized as a peer. And I remember on the way home, I called my father, and my father was one of the first Black executives for Exxon in the 1970s. And I called my dad, and I said, "Dad, you know, I know what you felt like in 1970 when you were the only one. And I am sure that was hard, and I can appreciate that much more." And he, it's my dad, so he loves me always. He's like, "Oh, it's okay, it's great, forget them, whatever, right? But it was really sad, and I was very pissed off, I will say.
Mhm.
And I kind of left that meeting going, you know what? I don't even want to be bothered with that organization. Why am I going to subject myself to that? And I told that story to a group of the SNMA chapter at Baylor, and they asked me, well, why would you put yourself in that position? And they were like, why do you do that? Why do you put yourself out there? And by that time, I knew the answer, because at the first I was like, why am I doing this? So at that same meeting, I met Dr. Louis Rios, who was in the leadership of the Texas Society of Plastic Surgeons, who asked me to become part of their executive committee. So while I was, mistaken for an industry rep at this meeting, and it was very hurtful and, just very dismissive, I had the opportunity to meet another ally who put me into another position of leadership with a different organization. And I tell the students that I will put myself into an uncomfortable position because I'm going to do it for the next generation. I'm 20 plus years into practice. I'm board certified. There's not a whole lot that folks can take away from me. And so if I don't use my voice to speak up to the younger generation, the medical students that are struggling, then who will? And so that's my why.
It's hard to escape implicit bias, especially in the hospital.
No, and I,
Where
and I, Dr. Lanford, I wanted to ask you. You are finishing your residency, so as the junior member of the call, you know, Dr. Sears and we're at the, kind of, we have control over our environment. We get to set the tone in our operating room. We get to choose who our staff is, and we're in a position of power that can insulate us somewhat from some negative situations, but we still can be subject to implicit biases. But as a resident, Dr. Lanford, have you had the experience where you are on the opposite side of a power balance, where you have had a microaggression or been the victim of implicit bias? And how did you handle that from being a resident, if you've had, an attending or an upper level resident, say something to you that was insensitive or ignorant?
Yeah, I'd say I've had several experiences, and what happens is that you end up developing imposter syndrome. So yeah, syndrome can hit hard in residency, and it comes in waves while in residency. So you start out as an intern, little knowledge, little experience, and it's the environment that dictates how you will blossom. And especially in a surgical specialty where positive reinforcement is very rare. And so it makes room for imposter syndrome or any form of inferiority complex. But then you kind of like grow, you grow out of it, and you kind of gain more knowledge, and you defend your right to be there with your clinical knowledge and experience. And at the same time, you're constantly being compared to your co-residents, based on your intelligence or technical skill. And then as a mid-level, you kind of learn how to roll with the waves. And then by the time you're a senior resident or a chief, you feel the insecurities of your readiness to transition into a full-fledged surgeon. So I'd say that, I've had several experiences. One of the ones that stood out to me, and it's maybe a microaggression, I would call it, was, during my first few months of residency as an intern, I was quickly disillusioned when I had to respond to a consult about, a problem with one of my patients. And it was another service that was seeking us out. And so during that encounter, my surgical colleague asked me where I had graduated medical school, and then went on to say that they were surprised that Hopkins had let me in because I didn't come from pedigree. And if I knew why I was even let through those doors, I'd be, surprised by the answer. And so they're basically alluding to that my reason for being there was an affirmative action decision. And so, at that moment, I wanted to defend all of my accolades and why I made it to Johns Hopkins, but all I could do was smile and walk away and not really address the situation. And so, situations like that, I would say that many residents go through experiences, especially residents of color go through those type of experiences. And they then, we speak on imposter syndrome and where does it stem from? And I'd say that it's just a lack of representation in our faculty or in our institution, a lack of support or mentorship and being able to find someone who we can speak to about this. Maybe the expectations of our performance. So making sure that we're ahead of the game and we're giving 100% or 110%. But most of the time we're trying to attain expectations that are unreachable. And so we end up suffering from that. And, being in a cultural environment where the perspective is more Eurocentric on healthcare. But, we have to remember that our patients come from many backgrounds. And with all of this, I would say that people of color tend to, or at least residents of color tend to internalize these microaggressions because they really have no outlet to do so. But yeah, I would say that's my experience with dealing with one of my microaggression experiences, but I don't think there's an answer.
It's funny. Sometimes you get into a position and we're all, well-educated, trained, confident women, but sometimes it's frustrating for me where I'm in a situation where somebody says something and you just, and I think it happened more when I was younger. Now I can speak my mind, and you just freeze, right? You're like, what, did you just say that? Like, I remember in medical school, we were standing in line to take our pictures or for the yearbook, whatever. And one of my classmates turned to me and said, "Hey, do you have a pick?" I said, "A pick? Like for an afro? Like, do you have a pick? Do you use a pick? Like, I don't. Like, what the heck?" But there's times when we can be the victim and we just freeze. And that's just really, like you're upset in the moment and then you kick yourself later for not being able to stand your ground. And so I want to explore this idea of imposter syndrome a little bit more, because there's this conversation of let's not say imposter syndrome. Let's not talk about it because it doesn't exist. It isn't real. And Dr. Sears, how do you feel about the definition and the term imposter syndrome? Is it real? Should we talk about it? Should we not talk about it? Should we not give it any air? Should we move beyond it? But what do you think about that?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I have so much to think about it. I mean, is it the right name? I don't know, right? But it's that internal feeling that either you're a fraud, you don't belong. And so, I mean, Lamina, your story is so interesting because, we all know that people say things like this to like accomplish Black people all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even if you have never heard that before, you know that people think it.
Mm-hmm.
So that thought is going to then impact your thoughts the next time you're in a room where you're the only Black person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that leads to this quote unquote imposter syndrome or imposter feelings of, and I have to say, I see a trend toward improvement, but I have been at national meetings where you look around, whether I'm like at a hand society meeting, a committee meeting, or a plastic surgery meeting, and you don't see anybody on the stage who looks like you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is more when I was a resident, but sometimes even now, or so few people who look like you. And so the thoughts do go through my mind. I think I spoke at the Limitless symposium conference in the past, and I said, "Hey, this is a confession. I often feel like I don't belong here." and the women were so uh, supportive and like,
Yeah.
it's supporting me. But I think it's important to like have these conversations, be open about how you feel, because that
Mhm.
people think that. And so it's hard to not have that awareness in your mind of, I'm the only person in the room who looks like me. I feel like I don't belong, or I wonder if people don't think I belong here. And
Mhm.
so because people say things like that, or people say things like that, it's just a vicious cycle of doubting yourself. So I think we should talk about it because it's a real thing that's going through people's mind. And part of it is internalization of previous past behavior. And I don't know that I would even call that comment an implicit bias, because I feel like it's like overt bias that was said to Dr. Lanford. But it's and and it probably isn't until you don't feel like you're the only person in the room, and there are multiple like versions of people who look like you, come from backgrounds similar to yours, whether socioeconomic, racial, gender. Like, we just need more representation, as Dr. Lanford said, because otherwise, then whatever that thing is that you feel like you're the only one in the room, you're going to feel like you don't belong.
Yeah, we've all illustrated stories where, I mean, patients or even colleagues have told us that we don't belong in the positions that we currently have now. So imagine the type of self doubt that we experience, or maybe tickle, because I'm sure we're pretty confident at our stage. But walking into certain rooms and you've accomplished a lot, but then being told that you weren't really supposed to be here is, yeah, it's a strong message that the world tends to give us.
And
Yeah,
I will add that it matters to patients a lot. So I'm sure both of you have also had the experience of where, that maybe you haven't seen the patient before, but they're a patient of color and they are very excited to see you. Um, I've had patients ask to take pictures with me so they can show their family who their doctor is. And
Hmm.
it happens to be personally more at the VA, because our patients tend to be a little bit more diverse, at least in the community that I live in. And on one hand, I feel a lot of pride and excitement that I could represent for them, or that they're happy to have a doctor who looks like them. But on the other hand, I feel have felt sad to some degree, because they don't expect it, and it's a surprise, and it really shouldn't be.
yeah. And how do you all feel we can try to help mitigate or decrease imposter syndrome phenomenon, whatever that is experienced, specifically by the younger generations, our residents, our medical students? And that's what's so daunting is looking at where the number of African American, Latin American medical students in this country really hasn't changed
No,
in 20 years.
I only had five black students in my medical school.
And so it's
Class.
it's it's something where if we don't bring it up, sometimes people don't recognize it. They're not thinking about, oh yeah, I didn't realize that there's not any black people in the room. And until it's brought up. And so we find ourselves in this double-edged sword of being victims of microaggression, victims of imposter syndrome, um, and I don't. And yet, at the same time, we still have to be our biggest advocate to the greater community, to the greater leadership, is to say, hey, listen, our voices are powerful and we need support, and this needs to be recognized. And so I know the idea that some folks don't like to talk about this. How do we invite dissenting viewpoints? How do we invite dissenting viewpoints to the table for a conversation? Because we're here talking to each other. We're preaching to the choir. We
Mhm.
understand the experience that we've been in, but how do we continue the dialogue in wider spaces in the greater plastic surgery community? Is it something that we can do, or is it something that is frowned upon?
I mean, I would say it's a challenge, right? Because like the individuals bringing up these very difficult topics of conversation, or whether you're calling out an injustice that you see, you need to feel like it's safe, right? Um, and the response that you get often dictates whether you feel safe to do it and empowered to do it in the future. So I think it's important when we intentionally create spaces where we encourage dialogue and diverse perspectives, is that you create an environment of psychological safety, which that's a term that is thrown out, but I think very few places truly achieve it.
Mm-hmm.
And in thinking about how is it that we respond to these, it's always the response that dictates the comfort the next time, right? So are we being defensive when we're talking about these very difficult topics of conversation? Because that's usually when you see something and you're worried about the discomfort that is going to happen when you try to address it, and kind of go through these mental gymnastics about how am I going to bring this up without offending the person, and
And
and will they?
that's exhausting. It's
It's
exhausting for us
exhausting.
because like I said, I hate to use the word victim. We're the recipients of implicit bias. And we're the recipients of microaggressions, yet we still have to be tiptoeing around the conversation
Mm-hmm.
and not upset the apple cart, or not, make anybody else uncomfortable in the room. And that can be, it's just exhausting.
Yeah. So if you're trying to purposely bring a group together of diverse perspectives, as a leader convening that group, you better make sure that there's an environment where people are open to truly share their diverse perspectives without, shutting them down.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been in a room where I'm with colleagues who had strong opinions about, disproving several health disparities in the Black community. And I'd say it was hard for me to really speak up because I was, it was like 20-1. And what was surprising was that one of my colleagues, she's a white female, she held strong in kind of disputing back and explaining that the data is real. And she looked at me. I remember her looking at me, and she looked at me as if like, I get it. It's not your battle it's not your battle to fight right now. And she understood the unfair burden. So, I think it's important that addressing them, whether it's microaggressions or, certain comments that are controversial, it's a collective effort for us to kind of all work on it, whether you're Black, white, Latino, Asian. You're there for your colleagues when they're going through a microaggression or a conversation that's just very uncomfortable. And I think there are several steps that someone can take to kind of have the conversation the right way, because at the same time, we have to be careful with not being able to listen to the other perspective. So, and I think this falls along the lines of, the cancel culture. And what's interesting about cancel culture is how it's influenced the conversation at the table. So I think it has had a positive, role in the conversation on racism, but it's also had a negative impact on racism. So I'd say like the positive impact is that it's brought attention to instances of racism or any forms of other discrimination. And now we're holding certain institutions or organizations or individuals accountable for their actions. And then it allows a space for marginalized voices to kind of speak up and talk about the systemic issues and really push for that change. But then on the flip side, cancel culture has also created a climate of fear where people kind of hesitate to express their dissenting views on racism because they're scared of being targeted or ostracized. And so then it kind of hinders, an open dialogue or any kind of intellectual discussion on controversial topics. And I'd say that another point about cancel culture is that it's contributed to polarization that we're seeing now. And so people are quickly labeled as cancel worthy, and then no one wants to have the conversation. So we kind of lose the ability to kind of bridge the divide between these two polarizing groups and having the conversation. I think it's interesting. What do you guys think about just having those difficult discussions, but then being able to lose the opportunity to speak because, people are scared of being targeted?
Yeah, I think it's a balance. It's an opportunity to have a conversation. And I've been in rooms, and I may have just shut the whole conversation down by stating something. I think you've seen this, right?
Yeah.
Where I've said blah blah blah, mic drop, and then people are afraid to say something,
Yeah.
and it is unfortunate because it is meant to be an open dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So we lose out sometimes when we don't hear the dissenting voices, but is I think it's important to just engage with conversations and to, as you have conversations, to put yourself in the other person's kind of point of view,
Mm-hmm.
and and understanding that there's the only way to deal with these issues are to deal with them, to long-term change, systemic change is going to be a concerted effort, but it can be a group effort. And, it's exciting because here we are today talking about this uncomfortable subject, and it's Juneteenth, and so this is kind of an opportunity for the United States to recognize the significance of Juneteenth. And regardless of whether or not you're from Texas or you've heard of it, it's 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 a conversation, it's a topic. So educating folks about issues, celebrating, challenging, is just part of regular discourse.
Mm-hmm.
But we have become so polarized in this country that you're right. We have a harder time bridging that gap, and I think it's just a matter of doing the best that we can, and recognizing it and trying. Really, I love Juneteenth. I'm celebrating Juneteenth in my practice because there's such an effort to whitewash history or to cancel books, cancel history lessons. And when you stop recognizing how all of these things are interconnected, it shuts down progress. It shuts
Mm-hmm.
down voices.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that I can say is that, just for those of us who are proponents of diversity, of inclusion, of decreasing imposter syndrome, is just to continue to fight and to talk and to lead. And at the same time, we have to be the best at what we do at all times, which is very exhausting.
Sure is.
So what does allyship look like for you all? Do you have an example of where or how somebody can be an ally when you are, in these tough situations?
Honestly, I mean, I feel like when you're in a situation similar to what Lamina, Dr. Lanford described, where you're doing this like a mental gymnastics, emotionally exhausted about how to respond to a situation that you want to speak up, don't feel it's safe, um, and you feel like sometimes, like, am I the only person that sees this or hears this? Like, it
Mm-hmm.
can't always be my fight. I can't be always the person in this room
Mm-hmm.
bringing these things up, making people feel uncomfortable, calling things out. And so to me, allyship is sharing that burden, right? And starting to try to open other people's eyes to try to recognize how important that burden is, to be shared amongst everyone, to share that emotional exhaustion and discomfort. And, I've definitely had a situation where, um, and for me, I personally feel sometimes it might be harder to speak up on my behalf, but I know I'm in a position of privilege in our system in academics. Um, and if somebody particularly one of my trainees brings something up to me, then I have an obligation, I have responsibility to speak for them, right? And if they're more vulnerable, and so it's sharing that power that we have with those who don't have as much and those who are vulnerable. And that's me giving allyship to say my learners and speaking up on behalf of other people. It's really really important.
Yeah, no, and I think one thing that we kind of touched on earlier is like whenever I'm in public or you may be Wilmina to me or Erica to me, but if we're in public places, it is Dr. Sears, it is Dr. Lanford, because really advocating for somebody else can sometimes be easier. I had an example just recently. I was in, again, another kind of executive session, small session, and this presentation was being made on the behalf of a team. And the gentleman kind of used, we've got the beauty, we've got the brains, and we've got the brawn. And, of course, the female, he's like, she's the beauty, I'm the brawn, and over there is the brains, like another man. And I just sat in the back of the room and I said, ew.
Yeah.
Like, how come she can't be, she might be
Brains.
she might be the brawn kicking you all into action. And I immediately took a note of that. And luckily, I did have some channels to go through, because I could tell that the woman, I could just see kind of a little look in her face when he said that. She's the beauty, I'm the brains, and he's the whatever. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to make a note and send that over to, that person's, supervisor. Because like, if we don't call it out, nothing changes. And so fortunately, that situation was beautifully handled and addressed and acknowledged. And so that's kind of like being an ally. And it's so hard. We've all got, children, and it's crazy that we still have to continue to teach our kids how to advocate for themselves and to, fight back about some of these things. And I know my son recently had an experience at work, and he said one of his coworkers, who he really kind of likes, told him, has had some off color comments here and there, and he's like, you're the blackest white person I know, or you're the whitest black person I know, or something of that nature. And my son was very offended by that. And what's really great is this younger generation. I think that they're sometimes a little bit more, I guess they're a little bit less, accepting, and they'll fight back a little bit more. And my son, he's a nice, sweet kid. He was just like, he's like, this really kind of bothered me. Can you help me craft a text message to his friend? And we kind of talked about it, and we wrote something together, and he edited it, and he sent it to his friend. And I have to say, I don't think my 18-year-old self would have been that brave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think just, it's hard to navigate these situations and to teach the next generation. But he sent it, and I asked him a couple of days later, I said, how was it received? And unfortunately, he said, his friend apologized and recognized it and kind of made a shift so that they can continue to work together. And so that's nice. Just being able to recognize that these things are happening, being able to advocate for yourself, to be an ally for another person, or even yourself.
I think that's a strong point, because at least as someone who's more junior, and for residents, that when you're dealing with microaggressions, or even if it's overt racism or implicit bias, being able to find support from someone who's higher up, who can kind of give you the resources or guidance to respond to any of the microaggressions. And I think we lose it, or not every one of us have that support system, especially in residency, right? You're in an institution where it's a surgical specialty that has certain expectations. And then when you're going through it and you're dealing with the microaggressions, I guess is the word, then you don't know where to turn to. You don't know who to reach out to. So, experiences like I mentioned with losing my voice, to being able to support or disprove what my colleagues were saying about some of the Black, health disparities. I think that when one way for allies to be able to be part of the conversation is to understand, the unique challenges that are faced by Black, Latino, Native American, Asian surgeons, and somewhat using their privilege and their platform to kind of amplify their voices. And so, advocacy is one of the things that allies can do.
We kind of talked about the why at the beginning, and I think that that's a great segue into this. Is as being kind of as tenured in my career, I do find that it is my responsibility to advocate and to bring it up and to talk about diversity. And I've got kind of the diversity hat, and I talked about how before George Floyd, I was minding my own business, just being Black, being wonderful, being fabulous, doing my thing. George Floyd's murdered, and then the whole world has this reckoning, right, where they want to talk about diversity and diversity efforts and everything else. And I was asked by the society, the Aesthetic Society, to be on the diversity committee. I'm on the diversity committee for ASPS, to be on the task force chairperson for the externship program. And I said, now that I've gotten a platform and the microphone, I'm using it to help spread the message and to point things out. And I'm very, I try to think that I'm a pretty, open person, but I am not going to back down from that. And I don't want to sugarcoat. I don't want to dismiss the experience that we've had. The healthcare disparities are so real. So real. I was, just shocked and saddened to hear of Tori Bowie. She is a Olympic athlete who just died having a baby. She's 30 years old. She won a gold medal, silver medal, excellent health otherwise. She goes into labor at home and dies. And the mortality rate for Black women in this country is atrocious. Mm-hmm. It's atrocious. We can't continue to not raise awareness and efforts that this is real. People are dying. Diversity is not just for diversity's sake. Diversity is about not just empowering people, but it's also in the healthcare industry, really about saving lives. And if we're not, like, I'm okay with talking about that, being very, very real, that people are dying. And I know that may fall on some deaf ears, but on some, it might create a little bit more awareness and activity. And I will tell you that the person that I spoke about at the beginning that mistook me for an industry rep has come back years later, recognized his action, and apologized. And so you may not see the fruits of your labor, your advocacy, your speaking out right away. But there's some, kind of trickling down effect. There's some sponginess that's happening where people may absorb this and then utilize that to help with medical care or just inclusion, just really taking this to the next level. And I think that we have to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And, we've raised our hands to be the leaders, to put ourselves out there. And I think that is the only, or the beginning, one way to continue the dialogue is just to have it. So if we don't, people are going to just, flash to the next news story.
It's not always easy. I've had a time where I've lost my voice to being there for someone that I should have been there for. But it was being in my position, I was, I had witnessed like a surgeon having a heated argument with a patient before surgery, and the patient was a Black woman. She didn't understand the procedure, and the surgeon just became very frustrated with the patient because that surgeon felt that the patient was stupid for not understanding a complicated surgery, especially since that surgeon felt that they had met with the patient in clinic. So the patient had to understand what was going on. And so the surgeon used very condescending words. And as a resident, I felt confused by my position. Do I intervene? Do I not? I didn't know what the ramifications would be. And so I stayed quiet. I felt terrible. I felt terrible afterwards because, this woman could have been my mother or my sister, my aunt, but I did nothing. It's not always easy to kind of go against when you're not in the right position.
Yeah, that's really hard. And I can't imagine carrying that guilt that's heavy. And again, we talked about it, it's really exhausting. I would say many of us, I'm sure everyone has been in situations where they felt like they should have spoken up, they could have spoken up, they wish they would have. And I think it's important to reflect on that and think about, okay, if I could do this again, how would I address this? Mm-hmm. One is also realize we can address things delayed, right? We don't always have to address it in the moment. You can, like Dr. Cash's son did, like, okay, let me regroup, get my thoughts together, and figure out the best and safest way. But I will say I've definitely done that and been in an uncomfortable situation where I was really mad and kicking myself for not speaking up. And then I've thought about, okay, what would I say if this happened again? And in a similar situation happened like years down the road, it gave me more power and like the words to address it by reflecting on, what would I have said in the moment the previous time. So yeah. I would just want to, give you some reassurance that you're not alone. And it's as a resident, you are in a position where, you never feel it's safe to speak up in that way.
Thank you.
No, it's happened to all of us, and it's just I just happen to have, again, been in practice for so long. I'm on a little bit of a different power dynamic, but when you're a resident or a medical student, even then, you are voiceless, you're powerless, and that again we go back to the whole imposter syndrome. It just kind of iterates or reinforces why the feeling that you don't belong here. It's an unspoken thought.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you all about the concept of this invisible backpack. It's part of that exhaustion, internal conflict. And how do we manage this without burning out or being discouraged? How do we protect ourselves from the drain?
I think we have to make sure that we are intentionally committing ourselves to things that also bring us joy, right? And so for me personally, I love mentoring. And I know it's really important for me to, represent for women, for people of color, and be there for them. And so even though, some of these situations we talked about are really draining, those in situations of me knowing that I can be there for students, residents, in a way that very few others can, but it's important to them, helps to fill me up and gives me purpose to know that, I'm here for a reason, and me being here helps other people feel confident that they belong here too. So I think it's just sort of grounding yourself in like, why am I here? What can I contribute most to get you through some of those harder times?
I think that's, a wonderful, way that we channel our energy, our frustrations as support. And mentoring, like you said, Dr. Sears, plays such a huge heart for the younger generation to see what we've been through, but also to know that we're available, that we're not just, kind of to be put on a pedestal, but that we're approachable, that we have been through everything that they have been through, maybe to a lesser or more severe degree, but we've been through it. And so I think, part of what I have done as a mentor is just to make myself vulnerable and available and to share some of my stories. And, I think the great thing is that, we're all excited to be the representation for, young women, men,
Hmm.
people of color, people, not of color. We're not really, singling any folks out, but, the idea to mentor people to bring the next generation along is quite powerful.
Yeah.
And, and I think it's just what drives us to continue speaking out. So, we're here. We've been through it. I'm sure next week I might go through something else, like, oh, I thought I'd gotten beyond that, but it comes back around at you. And so, Dr. Lanford, I'd really love to hear, about your legacy that you're leaving or you're creating or you're developing. And that is the creation of this wonderful organization that we're all a part of, called Walk PRS. Can you tell us about that? What inspired you to, take that on?
Yeah, it's my why. As the founder of Walk PRS, at Women of Color in Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery, I wanted to address the underrepresentation of women of color in plastic surgery and really create opportunities for the women I was meeting throughout residency. I've been going through residency and I had not really seen a face that looked like mine until I went to a conference at ASPS. And at that conference, I met Dr. Carrie Woodbury and Dr. Milton Armstrong. And previously, I had met Paris Butler. So Dr. Paris Butler was at Penn at the time. And I would say he was probably the only face that was of color that, was really advocating for students of color to get into plastic surgery. And with all of these experiences and having conversations and going through residency and experiencing imposter syndrome and, having to figure out or navigate residency, I thought, we need to create a safe space for everyone. And so really my motivation stems from recognizing the unique challenges faced by women of color in this profession and the pathway to medicine. And my passion for providing a supportive community that fosters growth and empowerment and professional development. And so an organization like this, it's really about the people who make it. And so you and Dr. Sears, Dr. Cash and Dr. Sears, you guys have been, your perspective and your input in how to, guide the current climate has really shaped the organization. Since you both sit as, advisory on the board, this organization really is an initiative to basically create a community that you can fall back on when you don't see yourself in your space. So, we currently have a mentorship program aimed at connecting established surgeons with younger professionals and fostering an environment of knowledge sharing and career guidance. This year, we are starting a research collaborative to support academic visibility of our Walk PRS surgeons. And so it'll be a platform so that surgeons can collaborate with aspiring researchers who are residents or students. And that way they can contribute to the field of plastic surgery and also, have that academic visibility, which, several papers have written about, where they're finding that women of color, it's hard to find them in leadership positions because they don't get grant funding. You don't see them on authors and on papers, and they're just not in the academic arena. I'd say that the overall arching goal for Walk PRS is really to design a platform for women to like strengthen their leadership, magnify their influence, and pave a way for them to bring others with them.
Yeah, and it's also a great way to support each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're a medical student or a resident or an attending, and we've got our little clusters, and we get together and we just I try to be just again open to my mentees to let them know I've been through it, but
Yeah.
I still get energy from you, from the residents, from the medical students who are excited to learn, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a very special medical student in my operating room last week that was learning how to suture for the first time on a real life patient, and she's so excited, and I was like, okay, this is cute. But it energizes you and it makes you go back and think, you know, there's a spark and a passion to what we do. And we go through a whole lot to get to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very, very sweet and inspiring to see that kind of that youthful energy, that, kind of that innocence. It was like, oh, I've learned how to, tie a knot. I've learned how to do a two-handed tie, a surgeon's knot. And it's like, yeah, okay. But then, you can't be cynical because, you remember, it was like, I remember the first time I tried to sew something, it was just laughable. And, but it's great to see that exuberance. And so even as an experienced faculty member or attending, I still get jazzed and I still get energized by the younger folks. And I still get jazzed by meeting new colleagues from around the country that I've never met before. And just to see, I will tell you that after, the first strategic retreat in 2018, I got invited back in 2020. And this time they were tackling the conversation was diversity and representation. And so it was just the beginning of the ice. It was like the first icebreaker, and it was still a little chilly or frosty in the room. It still was kind of going against a little bit of a headwind. But we had a special presentation by a medical student who went to Howard HBCU and Howard doesn't have a plastic surgery program. And she was talking about her journey and the challenges and the obstacles that had been thrown in her path as she tried to become a physician. She dreamed about being a doctor in her childhood. And then she gets to high school and they've got these little kind of professional tracks that you can kind of, embark on. And she was like, I want to do the medicine track. I want to be a doctor. And her counselor said, yeah, no, I don't think so. I think you should go into the nursing track. And so they took her away, like redirected her away from medicine into nursing. There's nothing wrong with nursing. It's just that wasn't her goal. That wasn't her passion. And she said she was so dejected and she was so heartbroken because she kind of just reluctantly resigned to her fate and went through the nursing program. And she said that she's doing this presentation. She said that she was visiting some family members. She was playing or doing whatever, head was down, and she hears a voice on television talking about plastic surgery. And it's a woman's voice. And she looks up and she sees me. She sees a Black woman on television talking about plastic surgery. And she said that in that moment, her life changed. In that moment, her dreams were validated. She was encouraged. She was inspired to block out the noise and to pursue her passion. And I can tell you, at the end of her presentation, I was not expecting that. I tried really, really hard, but the tears were flowing. And it was, such a humbling experience for somebody to say, you changed my life. And then I went to ASPS in Atlanta, which I knew was going to be, rich with melanin. and walk into the room with Walk PRS and Times Up PRS, and to see the number of women, the number of people of color from medical schools that are at this meeting, that are striving to become a plastic surgeon, and just to realize that just by being there, just by touching somebody, you really can make a change. You can make an impact. We can all impact lives. So it's crazy. I'll tell you, I used to like try to shun medical students. Like, can we come shadow you? Nope. Nope. I don't have time. The residents slow me down. No, like I'm doing that's why I'm in private practice. I don't want to be slow. I want to just do my thing. And since that moment, I have opened my practice to allow pre-medical students, medical students, and even a few residents come shadow me, even if it's for a day or even if it's a phone conversation, because that representation really, truly matters. It impacts and changes lives.
Yeah. The pipeline is so
powerful.
important.
Yeah. And I mean, Dr. Cash, Dr. Lanford, I mean, we definitely impact people who probably never tell us, right? And that us being there is really important. I mean, I had somebody who's a current resident, not at my program, who I met with on Zoom, who said, I wasn't even going to apply to plastic surgery until because I didn't think that I didn't see any Black people. I didn't see any people who look like me, so I didn't think that there was, space for me, and it'd be something that I would pursue. And then somebody told me about you, and so representation is really important.
You both were the first Black women from your programs. I'm the second, just so you know.
So we have more work to do.
We have a lot of work to do.
But I may have to add, I'm so inspired by Walk PRS. I mean, even being one of the more seniorish people in the group, to see the number of interested students, the number of residents in the group even for me is so inspiring.
Thank you for being part of it. Thank you to you both.
No, it is exciting, and we are kind of the band leaders, and we will continue to use our voice to bring awareness, to bring change, to bring inclusivity and diversity, and for any young woman, established woman, whoever is in a space of feeling discouraged or feeling like they don't belong, hopefully we can inspire you to own it, feel confident, know that you're not alone, and that we're here supporting you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I think one of the best ways for us to handle the burden is to share it. Well, I guess that's a wrap, huh?
That's a wrap.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Limitless Leaders podcast series, brought to you by ASPS, the Aesthetic Society, and the American Hernia Society, with the generous support of Allergan Aesthetics. We hope you enjoyed our conversation today and gained valuable insights and inspiration from our guests. Please check out other episodes of your favorite podcast platform. You can download them directly from ASPS EdNet. Stay tuned for new seasons, exciting new episodes where we will continue to celebrate and empower women leaders in plastic surgery and in general surgery. Thank you.